The form of hyperglobalization that expanded around the turn of the millennium was based on neoliberal economic theory. It was marked by a reduction in trade barriers, the development of outsourcing and global supply chains, the privatization of state assets, and the shift of power from national legislation to multinational institutions, the massive expansion of the global financial market, and the formation of the global cities network. But the financial crisis was to bring this massive expansion in economic exchange to a shattering end. The global flow of goods, finance, and services flattened. The well-accepted truths of the free market became reopened for questioning as multinational organizations like the IMF and World Bank have come to have less influence. Through the financial crisis, the political establishment in developed economies became increasingly delegitimatized as nationalism began to once again expand. While many speculated about the end of globalization, underneath the ashes, the seeds for the next era of globalization had already been sown, as a revolution in information technology was continuing unabated. The model for globalization was transforming. The globalization of today is no longer driven by increasing exchange of goods, but instead information and services. While political organization remains divided, soaring flows of cross-border data are taking global integration to new levels. As we approach 4 billion people connected to the internet, these huge flows of data and the platforms that orchestrate them have become the new architecture to globalization. The story of globalization as it has unfolded over the past decades has been one of a new set of information technologies, enabling the development of a global economic and financial system that brings humanity into a commonly shared value system mediated by markets. In the past, the linkage between the underlying information technology and the institutional structures that resided on them was not apparent. Globalization was seen to be driven by the institutional structure of the multinational corporation, of trade-free agreements, of financial markets, and the physical connectivity of the global city and global air and shipping networks. But after the financial crisis, this started to change. As the underlying information technology began to mature, there was an inflection point. Everything was starting to shift into the realm of technology and information. With the development of the second generation of web technologies, mobile and cloud computing, and the rise of online platforms, the world was about to become connected in unimaginable new ways. As the underlying technology and software platforms matured, networks were starting to take over the coordination of critical aspects of human organization. The internet was now moving from being a decoration on industrial societies to becoming the core infrastructure mediating global economic exchange. Information technology and economic markets were about to converge in a new model of the platform. Economic and social organization were starting to be channeled directly through this global information network, giving rise to what is called the platform economy. For thousands of years, markets and hierarchies were the only alternatives when it came to aggregating human effort. But through the financial crisis, both the markets and social institutions of the industrial age had shown their limitations. Now, technology was starting to show the third option: real-time distributed information-based networks. The critical economic aspect that started to change with the rise of information technology was the placing of the means of production into the hands of many, and the interconnectivity between them through which they could connect, collaborate, and exchange value outside of the traditional centralized structures. For the first time since the Industrial Revolution, the most important inputs into the core economic activities of the most advanced economies came to be widely distributed in the population. It began with computation, storage, and communication, but is increasingly expanding to all areas, including material production. At the same time, network communications dropped transaction costs to a very low level, making it much easier for people to set up their own networks for collaboration, value creation, and exchange without traditional formal organization. This meant that the production of information and knowledge could happen without large investments of capital and overhead costs of management and transaction fees. This in turn allowed for production to move outside of the domain of the market and more into the domain of peer production within social networks based upon a more complex set of motives and values than those of the pure market logic. We saw this first with open source software, core aspects of what used to be an industrial information and cultural economy turned into a social production economy that began to seriously compete with the major economic actors and destabilize power, disrupting traditional market logic in new ways that were previously almost unthought of. These new online organizations leveraged a critical new advantage that was made possible by the information networked economy, loosely coupled distributed collaboration around a common resource to deliver overall efficiencies, something that was significantly absent in the neoliberal efficient market model constructed around closed organizations competing. As the first generation of web technologies were all about the exchange of ideas, media, and information, it had little direct impact on the global economy. However, this began to change with the development of a new set of server-side technologies that led to Web 2.0, where people can both read from the internet and write to it. This new technology made it possible for people to interact through collaborative platforms, both producing and consuming content, creating new forms of user-generated systems as a means of production and exchange of value, not just of information and ideas, but increasingly of physical assets. The critical economic aspect that changed with the second-generation web around 2013 and 2014 is that the set of resources that people were sharing moved primarily from being information, knowledge, and culture shared primarily in social networks of informal free social exchange, to models where people were making money via the provision of services like driving someone on Uber or online staffing platforms connecting enterprises and workers on demand. Companies like Airbnb rapidly built multi-billion-dollar global businesses, reaching vast borderless communities via internet platforms. In this respect, the platform economy can be seen as the merging of the social networks and collaborative platforms of early Web 2.0 with the market as it caught up with the new technology and worked to commercialize the new possibilities for economic activity mediated through information networks. The result was that the early social, free, and sharing model got somewhat displaced by the market model, but also merged in new ways. These organizations absorbed the networked, user-generated model for production and exchange of services into a new platform market model, while greatly reducing the centralized organization that managed them. Within just a few short years, platforms rapidly scaled to become major actors in the global economy, whose scale and profits few could ignore. The internet was starting to come of age as a system of economic organization. In September 2014, the Chinese online commerce company Alibaba Group conducted its initial public offering, the largest ever in history. This event attracted considerable media attention, some of it naturally commenting on the changing balance of the global economy and the growing impact of platforms. Within just a decade of their origins, platforms came to dominate the list of largest corporations by market capitalization as people started to take seriously this emerging internet-based economy. These platforms managed to tap into the new possibilities created by widespread mobile connectivity and the coordinating power of advanced technologies to create scale and serve untapped markets more rapidly than ever seen before. They match suppliers and producers within two-sided markets and harness the untapped resources of the end user to meet basic human needs and desires in ways that would be beyond the imagination and capacities of the traditional closed enterprise. They activate communities of individuals and resources in new ways, accelerating innovation and challenging major incumbents. This new model to globalization is changing who is participating, how business is done internationally, where the economic benefits are flowing, and how fast the competitive landscape changes. Even though advanced economies, in general, continue to be the leaders in most flows, the door has opened to more countries, to small companies and startups, and even to billions of individuals. Whereas previously corporations would have to build their own IT infrastructure at great cost and time, this is now instantly available for anyone with an internet connection and the know-how. As such, success in the global economy becomes much more linked to technical know-how, innovation, and entrepreneurial drive, rather than finance and capital assets. This new digital model of globalization is much less capital-intensive. Rather than establishing a large physical presence in many countries, some companies focus local offices on sales and marketing only. Those that deliver digital goods and services can enter new international markets without establishing a physical presence at all. Globalization is no longer a hunt for the cheapest labor. With automation and the shift into an information services economy, production can be restored to be close to end demand and sources of high-skilled workers. Added to this, 3D printing and other distributed technology will, in the not-too-distant future, have an impact on supply networks and the cross-border trade landscape. The potential for a new distributed form of globalization is now forming based on information networks that link people directly into a common global platform economy. The global networks that proliferated with the previous round of globalization are transforming to become richer and deeper and more distributed through the proliferation of information technology. This has the potential to bypass the centralized hubs that previously dominated the global economy, as people and places that were previously on the fringes can become more directly connected into this newly forming global system of economic organization. In the past decades, this process of economic transformation was driven by corporate structures and the financial system, who will, of course, continue to play a major role. But after the platform revolution, going forward, the center of this process of change will be happening on the internet, as technology and economic development are starting to become one. The platform economy took us one step closer to merging our newly created web-based networks with the management of our global economy. It gave us a greater glimpse into the emerging networked economy and for the scale of change underway as the term disruption became the new buzzword. However, it is safe to say that the largest, deepest, and most disruptive structural changes are still ahead of us as the information revolution continues at full pace with a new technology paradigm emerging that will have profound economic consequences, consequences that go far beyond what we have seen to date and may well happen at an even faster pace.